coming up. So when you see that on your screen, I know that we're good. Awesome. Okay. So welcome, everybody. It's the last Tuesday of the month, and it's Soul Talk. And I have with me today Monika Becker.
Hello.
And so I just need to mute myself on YouTube, otherwise, there we go. But I will keep YouTube open to see if there's chat comments that come through. Otherwise, so welcome everybody to Soul Talk again. I have Monika Becker with me, and this is our first conversation with Monika. So we're going to have a very kind of, I would think of it kind of like as an introduction call. It's the first time you've ever met anybody, so we're going to kind of cover some really broad perspective questions, get to know Monika a little bit about the work that she does. And I have asked her to talk a little bit more specifically as it relates to, when we were talking about how to approach this, we were talking about this 99% mind-centric approach versus, kind of getting into our heart or that sort of that soul-y feeling. So we're going to go there, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how she's been working with the SMART goal framework, and maybe give you guys some ideas about how you can take things that you're already working with and adapt them and evolve them. So before we get going, I would love it, and Monika, if you would please just do a very quick introduction, let people know a little bit about who you are, where you are, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds great. Well, thanks, Trish, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Monika Becker. For the last 15 years, I have run my own boutique coaching practice called Clear Directions Coaching out of North Vancouver. Like, I'm now in North Vancouver. I started it in Vancouver, but now I'm in beautiful North Vancouver, very close to nature, which is also part of my holistic approach to life and work. So that plays in that way. And in the recent years, I focused on working in the leadership coaching realm. And for 6 years now, I have also included self-healing work in that coaching practice. And I love it when I can combine the two, because that's when the true magic happens. Not to say that they separately aren't very powerful, because they are. But for me, from my perspective, when I can help leaders, whether they're business owners, managers, or professionals in general, or lay people, they're all leading their life, so they're leaders in their own right. So when I can help them to become a little bit more congruent with who they truly are in their behavior and the way how they show up in life and in work. And that's the essence of my work, is to help people reconnect with their true self, find out, explore what their true purpose is, what their values are, what their calling is, and step by step learn to integrate that into the way how they show up in life and work. You are muted, Trish.
I do that so that there's no background noise while you're speaking. So when I was listening to you connecting the dots to,
And by the way, there seems to be a little bit of a background noise from your microphone rubbing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
While I was listening to you speaking a little bit about the, points A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, yeah. There was this moment where I really wanted to kind of just pause for a second and spend a moment just honoring and recognizing what you're describing in terms of this mashup, right? That's the language that I use when it comes to, finding a way to differentiate yourself as a coach, as a leadership coach, in XYZ. And I think all of us have to do this if we're in the world of work. Forget about whether or not you have a business of your own. Like there is a need or a necessity right now for us to become even more defined in how we position ourselves for for the betterment of ourselves as well as the people that we're here to work with. And so I really loved how you did that. I appreciate so much this coming from both sides, this idea of healing as well as more concrete, maybe structure, if you will. And so I think we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about that as we go forward. But I did want to pause and really call that out, because I think
Thank
that's
you.
something that I am really encouraging people to spend probably a disproportionate amount of time working through and sitting with and refining, especially if we are in that entrepreneurial world, because I think it flows through everything else. Okay, so from where we were, you're talking about this. As I'm hearing it from you, it's been an evolution
For
through
sure.
this process of coaching. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the 99% sort of my language, mind-centric approach to how you've been setting goals, and let's talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, to make the answer, I think, relevant, it's probably good for everybody to know, for the audience to know that I'm of a German background. And if you know anything about Germans, there is a strong tendency towards adhering to rules and following the rules, don't rock the boat, and things like that. And that definitely had an impression and formed me as a person who I became. And with that background, there's nothing wrong about it, right? But the tendency and the preference to just go to the mind-based and go to the rules and follow the lead of the leaders in the society or in the family was just something that really impressed me as I was a young person. And it also made me, so much so that it made me feel certain and safer if I had structure, if I had something logical to cling to, if I knew what my next step was. So somehow it offered me that sense of control and that sense of safety. All the while, there was probably something inside of me that knew better, but it became a way of being in life that was just becoming almost like second nature to myself. So for most of my time, whenever I was exposed to challenges or I was in conversation with friends or family that were having challenges, I always used my mind as my default to find a solution, a practical solution, something that made logical sense. And many times it was very helpful advice. Absolutely, right? Our minds are brilliant, so there's nothing wrong per se. However, it became so much of a way of being for me that I tended to ignore my emotional side and my spiritual side and didn't really give that enough of a weight in how I lived my life and how I made decisions. Right? So that was the
Yeah.
99% mind.
Yeah. So when you say mind, is it fair for me to make the connection between, when you're talking about the mind, you're kind of referring to the process of the intellect, like a
Yes,
lot of
yeah.
intellectual sort of thinking stuff
Yeah,
through
it's more
and
the logical and the
yeah.
rational side of
Okay.
things. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it is kind of important to just get clear on what language we are using so people can
Absolutely.
sort of
Thank you.
follow along, because I do think that the mind itself, my opinion, that's where I'm at right now. The mind is kind of a neutral playing field, and we can infuse it with intuitive insight, or we can use the intellect to be able to create on that. So and again, I want to just pause and honor and recognize and express gratitude, because you were very open about the impact that your culture has had on, and I think that is something that more of us could probably benefit from, is just being able to step back and look at the environments that we've grown up in, the environments that maybe we've learned how to do business in, learn how to operate with other people in, and start to see some of the patterns that have come forward from that, in order to be able to recognize whether or not they are valuable to us right now,
Exactly.
or if they're kind of now starting to hinder us, or if they're maybe a little more restrictive, right? Which is what
Yeah.
I was hearing you say. So again, I love this conversation as it's unfolding, because I think it just creates this, we were talking in the pre-call about this idea of thinking about the conversation as a funnel, right? We're starting in some big ideas and getting to know Monica in a very general, broad sense, and getting more and more specific about things. So let's talk a little bit about how you started to make that shift over into drawing more on your intuition, or drawing more into sort of a spiritual practice, or whatever that looked like for you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So the transition started in 2004, I think, when I connected with a spiritual community called the Center for Spiritual Living in Vancouver. And the more I started to attend their services and workshops and engaged with the community, I reconnected to God, or to my spirituality, which I had neglected for a reasonable amount of time, because the Catholic church that I was brought up in didn't resonate with me anymore starting in my 20s or so, right? So I kind of like then dropped God and spirituality altogether and reconnected with it in the early 2000s. And that definitely opened me up again to a bigger picture of myself, looked at me as more as a whole person that consists out of mind, emotion, body, and spirit, and not just the logic, right? And so that definitely played a big role for me in opening up again to accepting my own holistic nature, as it were. And then, as it happened in 2017, out of the blue, I hit an identity crisis, which meant that I, from one day to another, triggered by a question of what is your vision for your life, and I had none at that time. It just pushed me into this downward spiral of feeling completely empty and void inside, and not really knowing who I was anymore and what my life was all about. And at the time, I intuitively knew that all of the practices, the approaches, the tools that I had learned in my spiritual years before that time wouldn't really serve me. They wouldn't be doing the job for me to make my way through this crisis that I was experiencing. And don't get me wrong, I was still functioning, right? But whenever I presented myself or introduced myself at a networking event, yes, the words came out of my mouth, but I didn't believe one of them.
Yeah, I think I can totally relate to that there's just this, we're still functioning, even in the midst of, things breaking down and not making sense and getting very blurry. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I knew that those tools would not help me, but luckily I had been introduced to a self-healing method called the Dalian method, and I'm just going to show this quickly so that people know how it is spelled. So that's the way how it's spelled, Dalian method. And I had a couple of sessions over the past year, and I knew intuitively that would be the tool for me to use in order to work my way through this crisis. And it really helped me to actually then shed a lot of those some repressed limiting beliefs, negative emotions, judgments about myself and others that I had accumulated over decades of my life, where I tended to neglect those other parts of me, right? And where my upbringing and the social conditioning made me believe that it was not okay to show my emotions, it wasn't okay to be angry, right? And not that my parents did suppress that, not consciously, right? But there were so many factors that made me believe that it was either not safe or not acceptable, or I wouldn't be loved, or I wouldn't belong if I showed up in a certain way that I had repressed lots of my emotions and held back in my behavior. And I needed to do a very proper and thorough cleanup of my inner world in order to get through that crisis. And as I just said, like I felt completely voided inside because I didn't know anymore who I was really. Eventually, what happened is that I had that sensation as though there was a little thin stick of true substance showing up again inside of me. And that over time grew into feeling more solid and filled up with me inside. So that was actually a physical experience that I had where this deeper inner work and the reconnecting to all parts of me, where that really transpired in a way of feeling physically full again.
Thank you. I'm gonna come back to a couple of things, but in the meantime, I'm just gonna mention that you've got the same thing going on with your mic as
Oh,
well.
thank you. Thank you.
So, oh gosh, where do I even go back to starting? So first, okay, here's where I would like to go back to. In what you were saying, that you intuitively knew that the Dalian method was correct for you. Can you, is there anything that would help a listener or somebody with us right now kind of make the connection of what that intuition felt like for you?
Can't really remember exactly anymore, but if I try to think back, I think it was more of a sense in my belly that felt right and good versus upsetting or awkward or kind of like turmoil,
Yeah.
which can happen when I do something that is not what that I'm not
Okay.
meant to be doing. So it
Cool.
felt like it felt solid and calm and right. It just felt right.
So I think that's really cool. And, if you're on this on the call live or the live stream, it's possible that you are familiar with a practice called the heart brain coherence technique. That is one of the tools that I've personally used to be able to get into that intuitive state and really feel what intuition can feel like, what it feels like in your body to hear, like, yourself feel a yes or a no. And this is something I think I'm just starting to really circle back around on, is this, because intuition and, sort of those sixth senses that everybody talks about, I think for the most part, we kind of know that, yeah, that's a thing, but we really just don't have a clue as to how to start honing that, or leaning into that. And so, for those of for myself, this is more me talking to me. Um, it's a really good reminder that our bodies are always talking to us, that our bodies are a conduit for the conversation. And
Yes.
I mean, obviously I would have got this a lot when I was working with yoga and studying yoga and teaching it. And I still do it. I still see it with the teaching and in my own practice, that my body's always talking to me about something. My body's always communicating something. And, oftentimes it comes like when I'm in pain about or something, right? Like when I've moved too much, or when I've, moved incorrectly, that shows up in my body, and it's a message. It's a message. And so I really want to invite me talking to me and anybody else who's listening to consider that, it doesn't have to be this really deep conversation.
No, not at all.
It gets to be just spending quiet time, maybe with a cup of tea, and noticing what's going on in your body, noticing what you're feeling and where you're feeling it, and starting to have the dialogue, even just with your body. Like, why am I feeling that in my knee?
Or
What's
what's your
going on in my
message?
shoulder? And starting to kind of get into that in a different way. And it could be a new way, if you are already in a personal practice or spiritual practice, it could be a new way of tapping into that. So thank you. Talking about intuition, I think, is a really important thing, especially right now. And if you're connected to me personally and not, participating in this through Monika, this is something that I'm going to talk about even more and more and more, because the energies coming in through astrology and human design, not through, but reflected by those energies, are going to get more and more amped up this year. And I think it's going to be really vital for us to find a way to stay embodied. Okay. So you're moving, and am I allowed, can I say that that you're
Yeah.
a part of the 1% in human design? Are
Yes,
you
yes, yes,
comfortable with
yes,
that?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
because I thought that was pretty funny actually when I was looking at your 99% piece that you wanted to touch
Oh, that's
into. It's like,
interesting.
oh,
Yes.
isn't that hilarious? Because she's a part of the 1% in human design. So Monika is referred to in human design, traditional human design, as a reflector, and in quantum human design, her primary type is a calibrator. And like I said, this is 1% of the entire population that will find themselves kind of carrying the energy of this overarching type of a reflector. And so, I'm really intrigued by this. And if you are kind of interested in human design, or if you're in the human design world, I think it's really interesting even now to think back about what Monika has shared, and how even as a reflector, there was this process of making her way forward, and finding her own personal practice and connection with intuition, and connection to soul, I think, which is what I believe the intuition is all about. What do you think about that, Monika? Like how do you describe soul?
Well, you know what? In all transparency, I actually looked up the difference between soul and spirit, because I used both those words in my own invitation to this call, this conversation. And it actually reassured me of, now it deepened my understanding of what soul is. So soul is it's a unique entity. We all have unique souls, but they are part, like a wave in the ocean. Like they are part of the bigger picture, of the bigger soul of the universe, which some people refer to as spirit. So soul, from my understanding, is our unique identity, our unique footprint, our unique blueprint in the big spirit and soul of the universe.
Love it. I love that. And thank you, because that was going to bring me back to the other thing that I wanted to circle in on, because I think that spirit is kind of more the energy, maybe. That's how I think about it. The energy of the universe, the energy of the soul of the universe. And so that's another theme that's coming up big time right now through astrology and human design, is spirit, and really kind of stepping into an exploration of spirit, God, source, the divine, right? Infinite intelligence, whatever language fits you. And that, I think, is part of the call coming into the collective right now. Is there have been so many paradigms put forward for what God is, or what source and spirit are, and what the divine is supposed to look like. And it's created so much confusion. And I'm not saying that all of it's wrong, all of it's right. I'm just saying that we have gotten to a place where I don't know anybody who hasn't had that period, short or long, where they stepped away, and it was no longer a guiding, integral part of their experience on planet Earth. And this year, and probably for a couple of years more, because of the planets that are moving through these very spirit-oriented themes, I think the real invitation right now, back to the energy getting all zuzzed up, is really to redefine what that is for us. And there are just so many resources available now for us to try on and experiment with and explore. And in my own personal experience with it, I think for me, it's really ended up being quite a mashup again of a lot of different things. I don't think that any one tradition got all of it. I think it's filtered through all of what we see right now, from the East to the West to the New Age to the, more conventional, traditional pieces. So, well, let's just pause that for now. And so, what's interesting, keep coming down into the funnel, and this conversation that we're having around what is soul and what is spirit, and are we in fact feeling sort of a disproportionate sort of nudge or pull or tug towards reconnecting with this aspect of ourselves and of the world and of the universe? And it makes complete sense to me that, certainly makes sense now for me to look at the path that I've been on, and now hearing what you've been doing with the SMART goal framework and wanting to infuse a more soulful, sort of soully, spiritual lens onto that. So let's chat a little bit about that and see what comes up for other conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe I can start with how it came to be that I reframed the SMART goals framework for myself. And I don't actually know, I was thinking about it today when I drove back from an appointment, like what triggered that? And I can't really put my fingers on it. But sometime last year in the fall, I think that's when I started to think about it. And for me, it was one of the reasons to get to this place now is that I sometimes struggled with the concept of goal setting and with the SMART goals framework because it is so much infused and rooted in the rational and the logical. And given the background that I shared with you, I love logic, and it's still a big part of my life, and I think it's brilliant. However, through my history, as you know, I also learned to open up and embrace the other important aspects of me. And so I came up with this idea of adding a soulful or a spiritual component to the SMART goals framework because that felt like it was the missing piece for me. And in the process, and it actually took me much longer to come up with the structure of it or how to weave in soul and spirit into the SMART goals process. Took me longer than I had thought it would. However, that's probably a part of my experience as a reflector, that I always should take my time to consider next steps and what is good for me and what isn't.
Well, can I ask you a question? Did it take
Please.
did it take you 13 years?
About 7 months.
Yeah, no, you're good.
I don't know where the 13 years come from, but no, not quite that long.
I would say that I'm working on 13 years myself. So
okay, well,
that's my baseline.
Who knows how long my process will carry on? I'm not done yet, but anyway. So what I then created is a structure, and I'm still morphing it, right, as we're speaking. But it's a structure that allows to begin with a grounding of my goal into what my soul also wants to experience and wants to express in the world, right? So in alignment with looking at the goal that I have in my mind, in my logical mind, and to make sure that it is also aligned and rooted in and nourished from my soul's calling and my soul's desire. And that it also, like there's also one point in the SMART goals process, the letter R talks about the relevancy of the goal. So there I also have the aspect of reflecting, how does this goal serve the bigger picture, the bigger community, the world, the betterment of our world, and things like that, which may not apply to every goal, but sometimes it may offer an extra layer of grounding if there is that bigger picture that our goal feeds into, right? So by weaving those questions of alignment with my soul's desire, alignment with my core values, what matters to me, and making sure that also the measurement of success is not always just driven by external measurements and numbers and dates, but that it also, maybe a measurement is how happy I feel, how much more joyful I feel, right? How much more impact I might have had. Maybe that could be a measurement of success rather than it always just being data and dates and measurements.
Well, I love that. I love that on so many levels. If you've not read the book, We Are the Economy by Kai Romhart, he talks about this very thing that, we have metrics for absolutely everything except for well-being, and
Mm-hmm.
except for like feeling that sense of satisfaction and fulfillment, and we're not measuring that, and possibly, perhaps we should be.
Yes,
Because when I look
I
at the
agree.
world and I look at the way we're working and the way that how long it took me to sort of unlearn some of the really dysfunctional aspects of being in that corporate world of measuring everything and finding meaning in nothing, it was just like I think that there's a lot of room for improvement
Mm-hmm.
on a lot of these things. And I too really favor this back and forth, this balancing like yin and yang. It's intuition and intellect. It's not one over the other.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's kind of like the airplane two wings. The bird doesn't fly without both, right? It I don't think that we were meant to be wholly intuitive without like the intellect coming in, and
Mm-hmm.
neither were we ever meant to be just like thinking machines, right?
Right.
Hamsters on the wheel, just thinking and thinking and thinking. Getting into that feeling space and embodied space, and maybe even dancing with that idea, with that feeling of mystery and wonder and I don't know and what if, and
Mm-hmm.
um, and allowing some things to not have answers, which is, I think, where a lot of people, back to this idea of the spiritual journey and the invitation or the call back to just like finding what that is for you. I think we've gotten away from it because it was mystery.
Mm-hmm.
It was like some things are completely unsolvable, right?
Right.
And
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 unplannable.
unplannable. And if you go right back to where we started this conversation in the context of culture, I think that a lot of our cultures, specifically in the Western sense, have um, have a very antagonistic relationship with the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like the unknown, and I I think there's a beauty in sometimes not knowing and
Mm-hmm.
waiting to see how things unfold.
And as you're speaking and bringing up the word waiting, there's another aspect that was challenging for me and relaxing in the same way, which is the letter T of the SMART Goals framework, which is the time bound.
Mm.
Because given my background and my upbringing and my culture, like as a German, like as the way I was brought up, we are always on time. Like, or at least we do very put in a lot of effort to be on time and to honor other people's time and to be punctual. And when it comes to the time bound aspect of SMART goals, if I want to infuse spirit and soul and a more intuitive approach into that, I need to loosen my grip on my idea of what the timeline should be for my goals. Right? So
Absolutely.
there's this question. So can the timeline that I put on my goals still feel committed, but also divinely timed?
Yeah.
Like, can I infuse some openness for things for their need to evolve rather
Yeah.
than forcing them into a format that my mind tells me, well, this needs to be happened by the end of the year better, or
Yeah.
otherwise you are not successful with your goal. So that caused me both relaxation and a little bit of angst, right? Because my nature is so strong in wanting to have control and structure and a deadline that it's kind of like yeah, it feels nice if I can relax into the flow, the natural flow of things, but there's that tug of war inside of me, right?
And I think I used to work with a fellow, uh, and he was hands down one of my best bosses. And he used to say, the tension in the matrix, there's a beautiful aspect to keeping the tension,
Mhm.
to keeping the tension. And, we would always debate about, I need more time to do the project. He's like, you don't have more time. Appreciate the tension in the matrix, in the situation. Appreciate it for what it is. And
Mhm.
it took me years to really appreciate what he
Mhm.
was trying to say. But so I'm just wanting to kind of circle back around again. So SMART goals, for those of you who don't know them, Monika, let's run through what the SMART actually stands for. I think it's specific.
Yeah, sure. So the SMART, while SMART is a word on its own, in this particular context, it's an acronym. And S stands for specific, M for measurable, A for achievable, R for relevant, and T for time bound. And some people use the letters slightly differently, but that's the meaning that I assign to each of those letters.
Okay.
So I've added now an extra S to it. S plus SMART means spiritual and smart.
Okay. And so what I'm really loving about how I'm hearing you talk about this is that this isn't about throwing out the SMART aspect
Oh, not at all.
of the framework. Because there is value in that existing framework, but it's sort of maybe broadening the lens to consider that there are more ways to look at specific, measurable, achievable, right?
Yeah.
Than just being so linear or intellectual about it.
Well put.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you have an example of, and it doesn't have to be one of yours, maybe you can anonymize a client or make one up, but a goal that someone might set and how it becomes a SMART goal plus S?
I actually don't have a live example from a client right now because I haven't tried this out yet.
Okay, well, let's riff on this. Let's just make this up as we go along. So I'm learning how to paint with watercolors right now.
Right. Okay.
It was a goal of mine for one reason, predominantly, and that was the medium of watercolor is very loose. It's almost disturbingly unstructured.
Yes, not plannable. So
there's my goal. I want to learn how to paint with watercolors. How would I work this through this SMART goal from an S perspective?
Yeah, so first the grounding, right? The alignment phase and the spiritual grounding. So you would be invited to reflect on how this goal might align with your values. Of course, you need to know your values in order to assess that, right? So that might be a pre work that you have to do, an exercise.
Okay.
So, and then you could ask yourself, does this goal feel energizing or does it feel tiring and like draining, right? So that is a reflective question.
Love it.
Or what is the deeper soul desire in this goal for me? How does it serve me, right? How will I feel as I move towards this? Does it feel empowering? Does it feel joyful? Does it feel peaceful? Right? So first of all, there's this phase of making sure that this goal actually hits some of the check boxes, right? Of feeling aligned.
From a spiritual or soul perspective.
Yes, exactly. Strictly from that angle, right? And then as you move into, and there's different ways of how you can do that, right? There's clarification exercises. There's this beautiful exercise here, find answers to your questions that I embed in the process. And there might be checking in with your body, how it feels, journaling. There's different exercises on how you can do that. And there will be a worksheet that will guide people through that grounding process. And then when it comes to the actual SMART phase, you're now invited to write about each of those 5 aspects, the SMART, but not just from a logical and rational mind, but both combine that with the spiritual questioning and making sure that it's aligned. So for example, when you say specific, you're invited to clearly define your goal. So your goal is to learn how to paint with watercolor. Right? So now it's a deepening of the exercise that we made, that I described just before. The spiritual aspect now is, again, to ask yourself, so how is that aligned with what I want to experience or what my soul is crying for? What is the driving motivation behind it? And how will it move me forward in life, or will it pull me back? And make sure that the goal also feels right intuitively to you, right? It feels right into in your body, right? Your body gives it a sounding yes, resounding yes. That's kind of like the checking point for you at the specific phase.
Okay, cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does. And then, you can go on through that, like measurable. Okay,
Right.
well, here's how I'm going to measure. I'm not
Yeah.
measuring it based on, I, I'm
Well,
only laughing because it's laughable in my mind, but I'm not measuring it based on me putting it on a wall and selling it for money. That's not the purpose of this.
right. Right.
But it's a really good exercise for how not all of our goals
Mm-hmm.
have to have that concrete, linear, tangible, even
And
monetizable.
right. No,
Mhm.
absolutely. And the measurable part actually is a beautiful part of the goal, where you can just yeah, very nicely combine the logic and the structure with the
Yeah.
spirit. For example, in your case, maybe you decide the measurable is also defining your action steps and making them measurable. So maybe you are going through a course, and the course
Hmm.
has 5 lessons.
Hmm.
So now the rational measurability of that is to say, okay, I'm going to take 1 lesson per week. So
Right.
that makes it very measurable. So now the spiritual and the soulful checking in with you is, okay, so how do I want to feel at the end of each week?
Hmm.
And how do I feel? Is it actually enlivening to go through that exercise, or is it stressing me out?
Yeah.
Right? So you have these check-in points, and you can use them to then even maybe redirect. Maybe you need to give yourself a little bit more time so that it
Yeah.
doesn't feel pressured. Right?
Yeah.
So,
I
so
get that.
there's a beautiful junction of or way of how you can combine both the structure and the logical and externally measurable part, but also find some feedback from inside along the
Yeah.
way.
Well, I think that we could talk about this indefinitely because there's just so
Hmm.
much applicability and room for exploration.
Hmm.
Like
Yes.
as you're kind of going through that, but we won't.
Yes.
But we
Good.
won't. What we are going to do is we're going to bring the live stream portion of this conversation to an end. And for those of you who
Hmm.
are in Zoom, we're going to spend some time just talking with Monica directly, questions. Maybe you've got a SMART goal that you want to put a layer over top of, and
Hmm.
we can certainly do that. So for now, I want to thank you if you're on the live stream. Thanks for joining us for this one. The next Soul Talk will be the last Tuesday in May, and I'm just going to get the date up in front of me so I can remember that. That will be May 27th, and my guest is Anne Danae. She's just one of my favorites. She does haiku. And I just think that'll be so cool. So I'm hopefully going to get her to share some of that. So thank you, Monica, for joining us. And if you're live, hang on
Thanks
here.
for having me.